Hey YouTubers, it's the Turban King. A lot of guys are out there cranking out videos showing about how good their products are and what they do, but nobody's really talking to you about how to install it. Today I'm going to talk to you about some wiring techniques. There's no sense in you spending thousands of dollars to install solar panels and wind turbines and not have them work correctly or not get the full output of them. Part of that is poor wiring techniques. Many people are afraid of electrical. Most solar systems are 12 and 24 volt. Your car's 12 volt. You touch voltage every time you touch your car. Granted, the body is your negative side, but you're still involved with voltage. It can't hurt you. Your solar can't hurt you, but you still want to work with everything turned off. You don't want to have everything fired up while you're making up your final connections. Another mistake I've seen, some people use house wiring. I've seen scotch tape. I've seen duct tape. I've seen masking tape. All that is not good wiring technique. In order for you to do a professional job and to get a professional output of your panels, you really need to have a professional job, and connections and the type of wire and how much wire, the right size wire, is all very important because you'll get your maximum output. I have just my solar alone, I have 3,800 watts of solar, and I don't have a tracker on them, but I'm getting a good 2/3 of my solar down the pipe. So I look at 75 and 80 amps coming down the pipe midday, and I'm pleased with that because it is really reducing my electric bill, and electric here is not cheap. So we're going to talk about the tools, and I'm going to show you a couple of ways of making connections, the right way of making connections, so that you will not have any problems down the road. There's no sense doing all of this and not having it work the way it should. If you're getting 100 watts out of the panel, you want that 100 watts to go to your batteries or your inverter, whatever you're doing. But you want the full load. So we're going to show you how to make connections to do that. Let's talk about the smaller wire today, and we'll talk about the tools. As an example, here's several different tools I'm showing you here. This is a pair of channel lock cutters. I happen to prefer the offset because it keeps my fingers out of the work. A good tool will work a lot better for you. It'll give you cleaner stripping and cleaner crimping. There's a couple of different crimping tools. They're marked. If you can see this in the camera, you got a yellow, a blue, and a red. Well, that's because there are different size connectors. Here's the yellow. The yellow is for a size 10 wire. Typically, you're going to use a size 10 wire to run your panels, your solar panels, and sometimes your wind turbines, although I like to see a number 8 coming off the wind turbines. So that would go in here. Then you have different size lugs. This is for a very small lug. This is for a number 14, and it will take a number 12 wire. This will take a number 12 and a number 10. This particular connector here is for a 5/16 lug, which would be a 1/2 inch hex wrench that you would use on it. But the 5/16 is the diameter of the actual threads themselves. And then there's different kinds. This is a shielded spade connector, so if you were going to make a splice somewhere and you wanted to be able to remove it, This is made for that. It's also made so you don't have shorts, and you really don't have to worry about it once you've crimped it. Once you put it together, it's done. Everything's hidden, and we'll get back to that one in a little bit. And then there's another type here. This would be for a very small wire, but chances are you're not going to be using any of these. But I just brought the red ones out to show you. There's another example. This would typically be used in an automotive application. And then there's shrink wrap, which will show you how about that. Then these don't always strip the wire very well, so I always have another pair of wire strippers. These particular ones are Klein. This is a professional tool. They can be bought in Home Depot and Lowe's. They're about $15, but when you go to strip a wire, and I'll pull one off the spool here, you put it in the appropriate size. You want to leave about not quite half an inch squeeze. Yeah, make a liar out of me. There it is. And the little edges will cut the insulation, not the wire. This wire is really tough stuff. There we go. And now you've got a clean cut, and your wiring is exposed. You want to use stranded wire because it will conduct particularly low voltage better. It's also a lot easier to work with. Welding wire is probably the best because it uses tiny strands, but when you're working on small items like your solar panels, you can't get a welding wire much smaller than a number 6, which is pretty small, but it'll still hold roughly 100 amps. It's a simple technique on how to make these work. You strip the end like we did here, slide your terminal on, and it could stick out a little bit. It doesn't have to. I always like to stick it out so I'm sure that it comes through. Pick your favorite tool. This one happens to be manufactured, whose is this? Gee, it doesn't say. I think this is also a Klein tool. It might also be a channel lock tool. And you put it in the appropriate marked hole and just give it a crimp. And you can double crimp it. It's pretty hard to over crimp these with these tools. Over crimping them, they can loosen up, and that's your connection. And you can see it's pretty tight there. Now, a lot of people will use a pair of side cutters. Well, side cutters, if you're trying to squeeze these, this is pretty big, so it probably won't happen. But if you squeeze these, there's a couple of things. One, you could cut through the connector and just cut it right off and then have to start over. It also exposes the metal because it separates the shielding. So you really don't want to do that. If you had damaged that, you could always take some electrical tape and cover it. And I always recommend the 3M tape because it's the best. It'll last the longest. It's not so susceptible in heat, although it's not made for outside direct sun. Now, the proper way to do this is to put your connector on the tape, fold the tape over, and I'm going to do that so that it touches like that, so that the adhesive touches the adhesive. And then you want to snugly pull this and just keep rolling it around. Doing this makes sure that the connector won't come off. I'm just doing this because I'm showing you how to apply the tape. But if you pull, the tape has to be tight. You try to keep your fingers out of the adhesive because you got oils on your fingers, and that'll reduce the ability of the adhesive to stick to the product or stick to itself. And there you have a crimped connector. Now that's one example. There's a couple of different ways of really soldering. Jeez, I'm going to hate to strip that wire again. This is a number 10 wire, by the way. I always buy this in 100-foot rolls, but I do a lot of electrical things, so it always pays off. There we go. We got a nice little strip there. Let's say we want to solder something here. Well, okay, I want to solder this connector onto here. Well, that's pretty cool. How are you going to solder through that plastic? Pretty simple. First, we take our cutters, split it on the end, give it a hole. Whoop, whoop, whoop. These cutters are brand new, so they're going to be, grab a hold of it. And usually it just twists right off. You have to struggle a little bit. If you can find these so that they look like that without the plastic shield on them, that's even better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder this, and I'm going to show you a quick soldering technique. There's really nothing to it. Soldering irons aren't that expensive. This is shrink wrap. You'll enjoy working with this. It's a lot of fun. You cut a piece, and you notice how easily these pliers cut that. Remember to slide it on your wire first. Now, I'm going to move these out of the way because we don't need these anymore. I like this little tool. For years I always wanted one, and I never bothered to buy it. Well, I finally went out and bought it. I'm just going to put this wire in here so that it's easier for all of us to see. Let me put it over here so you can see it a little easier. I'm just going to hold the wire up there, like that. Now, we're going to put our connector on there. Oh, I wasn't done yet with the crimpers. I'm going to slide my connector on. Again, I got a little bit of wire sticking out. Take my little crimping tool, and most of them have these crimp provisions in the back. These are for the bare ones, and they're marked 10, 12, 16, 14, 22, 18. So in this case, we're going to use the 10, 12 again. And you want to try to do it, well, I almost had that backwards. There's a little seam in here when it's rolled on the machine. You don't want to try to put your point in that, so you want to try to have this so that it's the other way, and the point is right here. You really don't want to try to crush that point. You want that split down in the bottom here because you want to crush the hard part. So we're going to slip this on here. There we go, like that. Crimped. Man, I get a little overzealous, but you got the idea. Now, we're going to solder it. Our shrink wrap is in place. When you solder, make sure that the shrink wrap is far enough away that the heat doesn't get to it from soldering. And of course, I got to flip my spool over to get this to turn the right way, or is it? Well, I think I'm going to have to cut this off. Well, that's okay. Yeah, that's better. Let's get rid of the clutter. There we are. Now, solder. This is a 140 watt Weller. They're pretty common. They're found just about any chain store has them. They're not that expensive. They're about $22, $23, something like that. This is a roll of rosin core. It's a fine because it melts fast and it'll make a nice connection because you don't want to overheat your connections. The reason for that is because you don't want to melt the insulation. So, all you do is you put your soldering gun on the piece. And by the way, these have to be cleaned. This particular connector's been around 100 years, so I don't know. And you'll warm up your piece. You put your solder in, and you want to hold that on there until you see the solder flow around. It'll work its way right into the fitting. You can't really see it, but you saw how much solder I put on it. Now we'll let that cool off for a minute. By the way, when you're soldering, if you want, you can always take a pair of pliers, or actually I like to use a pair of vice grips, which act as a heat sink, which is what this thing will do. And it'll prevent the heat from going up. Now, if we can show this to you, the solder has weeped. I started out here. The solder has weeped all the way back, and there's a couple spots where it came through, and you can see it. Now, let's set this aside. We're going to slip this up on here, which is the shrink wrap. Whoops! I got to get my heater. Now this takes a little bit of finesse. You might want to practice it before you try it if you've never done it before, or you can go in and borrow your wife's hairdryer. This is made to shrink about 50% of its inside diameter. If you heat it up a little bit, the lighter. Don't stay in one spot too long. Don't get it too hot. You can see it in a minute. I'll show you. If you look at it, it's contoured to the wire, and it's contoured to the connector. This does two things. It helps hold the connector, and it acts as insulation. And if you really want to get fancy, you can always put a second piece on there. I'll just cut a little second piece here. Of course, we're getting away with it here because the end is cut. Slide it on there. Heat it again. Done. Now, I'm sure that you've seen wiring in panels inside maybe your washing machine where it looks very similar to that. A lot of that's done on machinery, but as you can see, your connection here would be just about as nice as anything you'd see professionally done, especially hand-built machinery. This is or electrical cabinets. We're talking about electrical type control cabinets. This is what you might see inside there, or you might see some of these. You may not always see the electrical tape. Another technique, let's say you have a 75-foot run, you thought you had a 50, you bought a 50-foot roll of wire, and well, oops, it's not long enough. Okay, so you have to splice it. Cut a couple pieces. You can use these, but these could pull apart. So you have to be careful where you use these. You don't want to use this type of a connector where there would be any stress on it because, well, don't make a liar out of me. They could come apart with a little bit of weight. Same thing with these. They could come apart. So you want to, they make a yellow type connector, and you can always identify it by this color yellow. The yellow type connector, again, is for number 12 and number 10 wire. You're typically going to be working with number 10 or number 12 in any solar applications, and a little bit heavier. You can always try to squeak a piece of number 8 into one of these, and I'll show you a quick little trick at the end of the video on an electrician's trick, which is called a haircut. So we'll get into that in a minute. So what we're going to do is we're going to splice two pieces of wire together by solder. Get our little stripping tool here, and we put it in the number 10 spot. And here you want to leave yourself about the same, about a ½ an inch or so sticking out. There's one. It's a little longer, but we'll take care of that. And then we'll strip the other one. It's hard when you get short pieces like this, so you have to work a little harder. Now, don't need the strippers anymore. So keep that handy. You want to loosen this up a little bit because it typically will come with like a quarter wrap. So when they run it through the machine, they give it a little twist when they put the insulation on it. But you need to loosen it up a little bit, because what we're going to do is we're going to take these two wires and number 10 is hard, and jam them together. There we go, like that. Then you squeeze down all your loose ends so that they're out of the way. Make sure that you got your shrink wrap on. I didn't do that, my apologies, but be sure that you always put your shrink wrap on before you do that. If you miss it, you've got the good old electrical tape. It's not as good as the shrink wrap though. Now I'm going to use this so that we can hold it up so you can see it. Here and here. I'll try to angle this so that you can see it. Again, with a soldering gun. You want to try to make sure that all those ends are down flat, because they could possibly poke through the shrink wrap. If in doubt, you can always double shrink wrap it. Okay, you'll warm up your gun a little bit and put it on your fitting or on your connection. Heat it up a little bit. Now here you can see where the solder is flowing. Back and forth a little bit. You want it to flow through as much as possible. Warm it up. Nice. It's easier when you're actually looking at it in real life than it is on a video. Now, I think I'm going to flip this so that we can do the other side. Oh, thank goodness the air conditioning turned down. I'm going to use this a little bit to crimp it a little bit tighter. There we go. Because it's hot. Again, warm up the gun a little bit. Put it on the wire. Wait a few seconds. Go in with your solder. And you put your solder right at the tip, and you can see that the solder is melting on the wire, which is really what you want. Now, when you're done with this, you should have a shiny connection. Like that. If it's dull and gray, it's because you moved the fitting around, or you moved your connection around too much while the solder was still hot and still flowing. That's what I was looking to say. Now, I'm going to cut this in half because we're going to play a little game here. I've got a couple of loose ends. Move this out of the way. I've got a couple of loose ends sticking out there a little bit. I'm not happy with them. So my procedure is one length of shrink wrap, a little bit of heat, just keep wiggling it around there, don't get it too hot. And just as a safety margin, we'll slip another one on here, slip it right over the top. In theory, there we go. Heat it again. And there you have it. Now, you can't pull that apart. It won't come apart. Okay. I hope I didn't go too fast for you, but of course you can always replay the video. We were talking about trying to fit a piece of wire that's too big, or I said I would talk to you about that. It's too big to fit into a connector. For example, you want to put a number 8 into, where are you? Here we are. You want to put a number 8 into one of these. You can do that. except it may not go all the way in. Well, the trick that the electricians use. Oh, that's it. Let's strip this. Put this into your stripper. Leave your 1/2 inch. A little twist. Boom, off. I hope I'm making this simple for you. Okay, here's a blue connector. It won't go in. There's no way. And electricians have this little trick called a haircut. And a haircut is nothing more than peeling back a few wires and then retwist it. Take your cutters, cut it off as close to the insulation as you can. Flatten it out so that you don't have any frayed ends sticking out. And you just want to take enough off so that it'll fit into the connector. Sometimes, no, I didn't take quite enough off. There we go. There it is. These connectors are flared on the ends, so you need to get the wire all the way down inside there. And there's 2 reasons for that. These ends have to be shielded. Of course, there's always the tape in the heat shrink. Get it all the way in. And you want the frayed ends, oh, I got one little tiny end sticking out. You want that cut end to butt against the metal of the connector. Take your crimping tool. We'll use the blue connection on it. These are one of my favorites, by the way. Oh, I held that too high for it. Give it a crimp. And if in doubt, like I said, shrink wrap it, which is preferred. I have a wire sticking out there, or wrap it with electrical tape. Now, when you're doing outside connections, it's always a good idea to put something on it to prevent electrolysis or rust or corrosion, whatever word you want to use. Couple of little tricks. If you want to go to spend the money, you're not going to have these out in the open. You need to put them in some kind of an enclosure. The chain stores have little plastic enclosures, which are splice boxes. You can get those for, I don't know, about $6 or so. You can bring your connections in. You don't necessarily have to use strain relief connectors, as they say, or watertight connectors, but that is the proper way of doing it. You can bring your wires in and silicone seal them with some good, with a good quality silicone. Use a little bit of, if you're going to have it inside an enclosure, use a little bit of Vaseline or Prochem. It's Pro-CHEM. Makes a silicone grease that is excellent. I use the Prochem because I lubricate everything, especially in a wind turbine. Your grounds are made through the bracket to the pipe. It conducts electricity. You want to put a little bit on there to prevent any corrosion. It also is a grease, so it'll make the bracket swivel a little more. You want to be sure that you don't have any corrosion. The key with all of this is good, solid, tight connections everywhere, just like you saw, and the right sized wire. It's not worth saving 15 cents to lose $15 in a year, let's say. It's just not worth it. Like I said, my electric bill is, well, this year is actually down a little more. I found some connections that were damaged in the hurricane, and I repaired them, and my solar is really cranking it out. The wind turbines, the new wiring is working well, although we don't have a lot of wind right now. So, YouTubers, this is the Turbine King. I hope that all of this helped you. I'd be glad to hear your feedback, and check us out. We have some really great stuff. Thanks.